Two apartments, same city, same zip code, actually. Both tenants are in their early 30s. Both have careers most people would consider successful. One earns $95,000 a year. The other earns $110,000. Walk into the first apartment, and it feels calm. Not sparse, calm. There's a nice couch, a clean kitchen, not much clutter. And in that person's bank account, there's enough money sitting there that if their company called tomorrow and said, "We're letting you go," they can hang up the phone, take a breath, and have 18 months to figure out what's next. 18 months of actual breathing room. Walk into the second apartment, and it looks better. Nicer furniture. Newer everything. A kitchen full of appliances, still in the learning curve. A closet full of things bought with the best intentions. And in that person's bank account, not enough. Never quite enough. A vague, persistent awareness that one bad month could start a chain reaction that would take years to undo. Same city. Similar income. Completely different financial reality. And here's the thing that most financial content gets completely wrong about this. It's not about discipline. It's not about willpower or sacrifice or who works harder. It's not even really about the income. It's about structure. The quiet, invisible architecture of how money flows through a life. What it gets attached to, what it funds, what it escapes into. And once you understand that architecture, you start seeing it everywhere. You start seeing exactly why some people with average incomes feel genuinely secure, and why some people with impressive incomes feel like they're always one step behind something. That's what this is about. Most people don't lose their financial footing in dramatic, obvious ways. It's rarely one catastrophic decision. It's almost never as simple as they bought too much. It's quieter than that, more gradual, more invisible. What actually happens is this. Income goes up. Life expands to meet it, not in one big, deliberate choice, in dozens of small, reasonable ones. The slightly nicer apartment when the lease was up because you could afford it and you deserved it. The car upgrade because the old one was paid off and the payment on the new one wasn't that bad. The subscriptions that accumulate like sediment, each one individually defensible, collectively significant. The dinners out that started as a treat and became the default because cooking after a 10-hour day felt impossible. None of these decisions are stupid. That's what makes this hard. Every one of them makes sense in isolation, but what they add up to is a fixed cost structure that quietly grows to consume almost everything coming in. And then income has to keep rising just to stay comfortable. The treadmill gets faster. The margin disappears. And you find yourself earning more than you ever imagined at 22, and somehow still feeling financially anxious at 34. The trap isn't bad decisions. The trap is never stopping to look at the whole picture. Never asking, what am I actually building here? There's a reframe I want to introduce early, because I think it changes how you see almost every purchase you make. Everything you own costs money twice. The first time is obvious. The price tag, the transaction, the number that leaves your account or lands on your credit card. That part everyone understands. The second cost is quieter. It's the maintenance, the storage, the insurance, if it's valuable enough, the mental space it occupies, the low-grade awareness that the thing exists and needs attention, and might break, and will eventually need to be replaced. The opportunity cost of the money that's now tied to an object instead of working somewhere else. Think about a boat. Someone buys a boat, let's say $35,000. That's the first cost. The second cost is the slip fees, the maintenance, the winterizing, the trailer, the registration, the insurance, the weekends that now feel obligated rather than chosen. Studies consistently show that boat owners use their boats far less than they anticipate when they're buying them. And the boat sits. And the second cost keeps accumulating whether the boat moves or not. Now, I'm not here to tell you not to buy a boat. That's not the point. The point is that most people calculate the first cost carefully and barely acknowledge the second one at all. And it's the second cost, repeated across dozens of purchases and decisions, that creates a financial stress that good income alone cannot solve. So let's talk about some rules. Not rigid rules, not a checklist, more like a set of lenses that, once you have them, you can't really stop using. The first one is what I think of as the cost per use lens. It's simple but powerful. before any significant purchase. You ask one question, not can I afford this, but how often will I actually use this? And then you do the uncomfortable math. A $200 kitchen gadget you use twice a year costs you $100 per use. A $200 pair of running shoes you wear 4 times a week costs you essentially nothing per use within a few months. The price tag is the same. The value is completely different. High earners get into trouble not because they spend money. They should spend money, they earned it, but because they spend it on things with very low cost per use ratios, and then wonder why the money never seems to stretch far enough. The question isn't what does this cost? It's what does this cost me each time it actually serves its purpose? Closely related to that is something I call the replacement test. And this one is less about buying and more about keeping. Every few months, it's worth asking yourself, if I didn't own this already, would I spend money to go buy it right now? Not sentimentally. Honestly, would you, today, with full knowledge of how often you use it and how much space it takes up, go out and purchase this thing again? A lot of what we own wouldn't pass that test. And that matters because ownership has a carrying cost. In space, in mental energy, in the subtle weight of having too much to manage. Simplifying what you own isn't minimalism for aesthetics. It's reducing the ongoing tax that accumulated possessions place on your attention and your peace. Here's one that hits harder than it should. Never upgrade out of boredom. This one is responsible for an enormous amount of financial leakage in high-earning households. The car isn't broken. It runs perfectly. There's just something newer available. And the old one has started to feel ordinary. The apartment is fine. There's just a nicer building nearby. The phone works. But there's a newer model and the upgrade offer landed in your inbox at exactly the right low moment. Boredom is genuinely one of the most expensive emotional states in modern consumer life. Because boredom doesn't feel like boredom. It feels like need. It convinces you that the mild dissatisfaction you're feeling is the product's fault rather than a natural human experience that will pass on its own. The discipline here isn't deprivation. It's learning to recognize the difference between genuine desire, something that will meaningfully improve your life or bring lasting value, and the momentary pull of novelty. That gap, once you can see it clearly, saves an extraordinary amount of money over a lifetime. The 24-hour rule is something a lot of people have heard of, but few people actually use consistently. It's straightforward. Any unplanned purchase above a threshold you set for yourself, maybe $100, maybe $200, waits 24 hours before you act on it. What happens in those 24 hours is interesting. Sometimes the desire gets stronger and you realize it was genuine. More often it fades. The urgency that felt so real in the store or on the website turns out to have been largely situational. The marketing worked on you in that moment and the moment passed. This is not about being restrictive. It's about making sure the decision is actually yours, that it comes from intention rather than impulse. High earners with disposable income are, in some ways, more vulnerable to this than anyone, because the friction of actually being unable to afford something isn't there to slow them down. The only break available is a deliberate one. Lifestyle multiplier awareness is less a rule and more a way of seeing. When you make a decision to step up your lifestyle in one area, bigger home, nicer neighborhood, private school for the kids, you're not just paying for that one thing. You're often triggering a cascade of connected costs. The bigger home means higher property taxes, more furniture to fill it, higher utility bills, more maintenance, probably a larger mortgage that requires both incomes to sustain. The nicer neighborhood comes with social context, neighbors, activities, expectations that subtly pressure your spending in ways that are almost impossible to track. The private school tuition is a visible cost. The invisible cost of the school trips, the fundraisers, the wardrobe expectations, the birthday party culture. None of this means don't do it. It means go in with eyes open. It means understanding that every lifestyle upgrade has a multiplier attached to it. And the multiplier is almost always larger than the original number. We talked about this in different language earlier, but it deserves its own clear framing here. The one-income survival test. If your household has 2 incomes, or if you're single and your lifestyle requires your current salary to function, ask yourself honestly, could the fixed cost structure of my life survive on significantly less? Not thrive, survive, cover the essentials without catastrophe? If the answer is no, you are structurally fragile regardless of what your annual income looks like on paper. And fragility at $150,000 feels exactly as uncomfortable as fragility at $50,000. The anxiety doesn't care about the number. It responds to the margin. Building a life whose fixed costs can be met by one income, or by a meaningfully reduced income, is not about being pessimistic. It's about buying yourself the ability to absorb a bad year without it becoming a crisis. That capacity is worth more than almost any upgrade you could apply the money to instead. Define enough. This might be the hardest one, because enough is a moving target by default in a culture designed to keep it moving. Enough house, enough car, enough wardrobe, enough experiences. The cultural forces around income and consumption are very good at making whatever you feel like the baseline from which more is needed. And they're most effective on people who have the income to keep responding to that pull. Defining enough requires a deliberate act. Sitting down, genuinely sitting down, and asking, what does a life I'm actually satisfied with require? Not the aspirational version. Not the version that looks good from the outside. The version that, at the end of a regular Tuesday, leaves you feeling like you're where you're supposed to be. Once you have that definition, even a rough one, you have something to anchor to. You have a way to evaluate whether a financial decision is moving you towards something real or just feeding an appetite that was never really yours to begin with. And underneath all of this sits something more important than any individual rule. Something worth sitting with. What does money actually give you that matters? Not in abstract terms. In your specific life. Can you leave a job that's slowly grinding you down without the leaving causing financial catastrophe? Can you take 6 months off if your health or your family or your sanity requires it? Can you say yes to an opportunity that doesn't pay immediately because you have enough cushion to absorb the gap? Can you take a meaningful risk? Start the thing, move to the city, retrain for career, without that risk threatening your entire foundation? That's what financial security actually feels like from the inside, not a number, not a net worth figure on a spreadsheet. The lived experience of having options, of feeling like your choices are actually yours, of not needing to say yes to things you want to say no to simply because the financial pressure requires it. This is optionality, and it is genuinely what money is for, not the things, not the lifestyle markers, the freedom to choose, the capacity to absorb uncertainty without panic, the quiet confidence of knowing that whatever happens next, you have room to respond thoughtfully rather than desperately. Most high earners spend their money on things. The ones who feel secure spend it on room. So what does this actually look like in practice? Not theoretically. This week, this month, this quarter. This week, do one honest thing. Look at your fixed monthly costs and ask which ones your life actually requires versus which ones you just stop questioning. Not to eliminate everything, just to see clearly what's there. This month, pick one area where the lifestyle multiplier has been running quietly in the background and decide intentionally whether it's working for you, not defensively, with genuine curiosity. If it is, great. If it isn't, you now have the awareness to do something about it. This quarter, set a number, not a vague goal, an actual target for what your liquid savings should be, your breathing room fund. What number would make you feel genuinely less anxious? Work backward from that. Make it the priority before the next upgrade, before the next addition, before the next thing that makes life look better from the outside. And over time, build toward a structure where your life doesn't require everything to go right. Where a bad month is a bad month, not a spiral. Where your income is building something real rather than just sustaining a consumption level that has to be maintained forever. Remember those 2 apartments at the beginning. Same city, similar income. Completely different experience of financial life. The difference was never the number on the paycheck. It was never about who worked harder or who deserved more. It was about what each person had decided, consciously or not, to build their money into. One built security. One built overhead. And here's the question worth carrying with you. Do you own your possessions or do they own you? Does your lifestyle serve your life or does your life serve your lifestyle? Because the goal was never to accumulate more. The goal was always to feel free. And freedom, real, daily, breathable freedom, turns out to be a structural choice. One you can start making right now, at whatever income you're at. If this shifted something for you, subscribe. There's more of this kind of honest, clear thinking coming. No fluff, no hype, just real conversation about building a financial life that actually works.